Daniel says that it's better to join as an entire bloc because that way we'll be able to get major concessions out of China. Two problems. First, the link that we're talking about is not contingent on the entirety of the EU joining as a bloc. It is contingent on France and Germany standing firm and saying, no, we're not going to join unless you give us concessions, because those are the two countries with the greatest amount of legitimacy in the eyes of the international community. But second of all, once these European countries join, China has no incentive to change the BRI because it has already gotten the participation of these European countries. In fact, if these countries become economically reliant on China, they no longer have an avenue to criticize China economically. We see this when Hungary, for example, vetoes resolutions criticizing China in the South China Sea because they're so scared that China is going to withdraw their economic investments. We say that Europe loses its leverage once they join the BRI. Then they say that ultimately the uniqueness is bad because China is rising as a global power. This doesn't address the problem of debt, right? Like, debt is not a short-term problem. If China has ballooning problems of debt and can't constrain its debt problem, then ultimately it's going to have a problem borrowing money, for example. This doesn't interact at all with what we're saying, which is that China is an economic problem, not a political problem about its rising power. Let's go into the second warrant on leveraging reform. He makes three responses. First, he says there are mutual benefits to joining. We say that the EU needs to stay out right now in order to make reform to the BRI. Maybe there's some mutual benefits to joining, but we see these benefits could be exponentially bigger to the EU and to places like Africa if the EU stays out for now. Second, he says that countries are always going to join. And he says, for example, that Germany and France are inevitably going to join because they have trade with China. The problem is that the BRI is not trade with China. The BRI is getting loans from China. In that respect, France and Germany don't have to turn to China for loans because they have really good economies, so they can turn to other places like the IMF, for example, that have more favorable loans to them. It is only poorer countries that have to turn to China because they don't have other favorable options. This is really important because when he quotes Merkel and says Merkel really wants to play an active role in the BRI, what Merkel is actually saying is that she wants to play an active role in the BRI, but only if there are major concessions being made, like trade reciprocity. This is the position we are advocating for. We say the EU should not join the BRI until these critical concessions are being made. Finally, he says it's better to join as a bloc. I already responded to that with the overview. Then at the impact, he says that debt is fine if there is growth. The problem is we say there is not growth because the central evidence indicates that in 23 out of the 68 countries, debt is outpacing growth so fast that debt is eventually going to become a problem for these countries. Let's go to the affirmative case. Their only contention is about benefits to Europe. Three responses at the top level. First, the Valero 19 evidence at the top of our case writes that while the EU hasn't joined as a bloc, individual countries are joining with nearly half of the EU already committed to the BRI. This means that all the countries that need investment from the BRI already or will have already joined the BRI, which means their benefits to Europe are non-unique. We say it is only capital-rich countries like France and Germany who aren't going to join. Second, our case outweighs is because about the whole Belt and Roll initiative in places like Africa, which have higher rates of poverty, less social safety nets, etc., than Europe, so we say that you should prioritize our case first. Third, the Stansel evidence says that China engages in BRI operations through loans that result in high levels of debt. But critically, Madrid 12 of the New York Review writes that the EU has become a vicious circle of burgeoning debt lead to radical austerity measures, which result in calls for damaging cuts in government spending and higher taxes. Problematically, Edwards 19 of Business Insider writes that the contraction is a deliberate political choice made by Europe's own governments, their effort to rein in the debt. Austerity has prevented its ability to grow again. By taking on large amounts of debt, it prompts European countries to push for radical austerity measures similar to those taken at the 2008 crisis, preventing us out of getting out of the next recession. Let's go on the first link. First, realize that these loans aren't going to benefit Europe because China predominantly uses Chinese labor. That's what Kleiman finds when he says that when you contract Chinese private companies, you use Chinese labor, not European labor. But the second is that if the recession is coming in 2020 and infrastructure investments are predominantly long-term, this is not going to be soon enough in order to stave off the recession. They don't have any unique benefits here. Let's go on to the second warrant on trade. Two terms. First, on market reciprocity, what Castorani finds is that because China exports so much to Europe, but Europe doesn't export as much to China, the benefits of railways are predominantly felt by Chinese companies, not by European companies, means China gets more competitive in the European market. But the second is on empty containers. Because Europe doesn't export as much to China, the shipping costs are higher because they have to export more empty containers back to China, which means, again, Chinese companies predominantly get the benefits of lower shipping costs. They become more competitive in the European market, and they push out European companies.